People have always doubted scientists from the beginning of time, and it's nothing new in today's time. The reason it seems so rampant now is due to the recent pandemic, which has gotten a lot of people to come out and voice their own, shall we say, opinions. And the presence of social media has certainly created a method in which each individual's voice can travel further. Now, I wanted to take a break from making videos about this virus, but I keep seeing misinformation on the internet, which irritates me a little bit. It's no doubt that anyone who has a following that announces their distrust for science, the vaccine, masking, etc., are actively making the pandemic worse and indirectly killing people. And funny enough, this seems to be politically driven. Now, I avoid politics on my channel, but talking about things like COVID has made me feel like I'm crossing that line a bit, even though something as stupid as a virus shouldn't be politicized, but for some reason it is. And of course, you can be a reasonable person in any side of the political spectrum, but people who lean further to the right tend to be anti-science. But again, I don't want to make this more political than it already is, so let's just check out this video.
Over the past couple years, I've noticed this type of dogma forming around the experts. You know, we have to listen to the experts, trust the experts, don't challenge the experts. And I am one of the first people to acknowledge that there are so many folks out there who know more than me about science, medicine, really any number of topics, and I am happy to defer to their expertise when necessary.
Well, okay, I guess that's the end of the video. That was easy.
But I think we've gotten to a point as a society, and I think the pandemic has really just sped things up, where even questioning someone who is an expert or trying to think for yourself is viewed as heresy.
I don't know what kind of people you talk to, but I certainly do not see that happening. If you just question the experts, as in you ask them a question, no one is going to consider that heresy. However, that's not what people are doing. People are not questioning the experts. They're claiming to know more, and they're actively going out of their way to oppose the experts. When anti-vaxxers are spreading misinformation on social media, when people promote ivermectin as a COVID treatment, when people oppose masking in schools, that's more than just questioning the experts. That's taking an opposing stance. Now, just questioning an expert or directing a question towards them is perfectly fine. And of course, just like any other field, you'll have exceptions in the scientific community too, where you can find a few scientists that take extreme positions. That's why the concept of the scientific community and the scientific consensus exists, and those are important when considering what is scientifically determined to be true.
And so in this video, what I wanted to do is choose one group of the experts and just kind of talk about how, no, they're not infallible. No, like the rest of us, they are not above being corrupted, and why ultimately, even if we aren't experts ourselves, that does not mean we should just give up thinking because other people are doing it for us.
Let me be clear. No organization is infallible. No individual scientist is infallible. People make mistakes and people can be wrong, even in their own field of expertise. However, just claiming that does not mean you should not be trusting of the FDA, especially if you are uneducated in the field of science. When it comes to flying on a plane, I'm not an engineer, but I trust the engineers that built the plane. Same with science. We all trust the iPhones, the metformin, the computers you use, because those were built on the back of fundamental scientific concepts that the regular person does not know. So why is it that you're so ready to trust experts when it comes to technology and medicine, but suddenly when there's a pandemic, you don't trust them anymore? This is how society is built. People who are specialized in different fields contribute to society in their field of expertise. And like any other field, like the engineer that built your plane, you should listen to the experts in the fields that you yourself are uneducated in. So when it comes to infectious diseases, you listen to the biologists. And this is clearly a problem that circulates throughout the scientifically illiterate. I'm a biologist that has worked in multiple different scientific organizations ranging from academic universities to private biotech companies, and the mindset of all the scientists I worked with have all had uniform thinking. No one really opposes the common scientific thought because we are all in agreement. It is only in the scientifically uneducated where people come out and suddenly try to oppose viewpoints from scientific organizations such as the FDA. And it's so obvious that people oppose things like vaccinations, mask mandates, and social distancing because they don't have an understanding of certain scientific concepts.
All right, so just so we're all starting on the same page, let's first go over who exactly the FDA are.
Let's fast forward a bit since everyone knows who the FDA is.
Okay, now one of the ways in which you've probably heard of the FDA recently is that they just approved the Pfizer vaccine for COVID. But here is where we come to our first caveat in trusting the experts. In their statement confirming that the Pfizer vaccine had been given approval, the FDA also announced that, quote, the vaccine also continues to be available under emergency use authorization, including for individuals 12 through 15 years of age and for the administration of a third dose in certain immunocompromised individuals. individuals. So to be clear, at the moment, the FDA is only recommending booster shots for certain immunocompromised individuals. That's not what the CDC is recommending. As the CBC reported, the US CDC on Friday backed a booster shot of the Pfizer vaccine for Americans age 65 and older, some adults with underlying medical conditions, and some adults in high-risk working and institutional settings. The move comes after an advisory panel to the agency on Thursday did not recommend that people in high-risk jobs, such as healthcare workers, teachers, and risky living conditions, should get boosters. The panel had recommended boosters for elderly and some people with underlying medical conditions. So, in this situation, which the experts are we supposed to trust? The FDA is saying boosters for people who are immunocompromised. The CDC's advisory panel is saying boosters for the elderly and for people who are immunocompromised, but the CDC themselves are saying boosters for the elderly, people who are immunocompromised, and people who are working in high-risk conditions. How are we supposed to listen to the experts and trust the experts when the experts don't even agree with themselves?
Okay, so it seems you're a little confused, but that's okay. First of all, let's observe the timing of these announcements. The first one you showed by the FDA when they announced full approval of the Pfizer vaccine was on August 23rd. Meanwhile, the CDC segment you showed was on September 22nd. That's nearly a whole month afterwards. And guess what? Of course, if you compare experts on different time frames, what they said might not match up. And meanwhile, on September 22nd, the same day as the quote you pulled from the CDC, the FDA came out saying booster shots are available for individuals at or over the age of 65, people who are at high risk of severe COVID-19, which by the way is an indirect way of saying the same thing as immunocompromised or having another pre-existing condition, and of course, individuals whose frequent institutional or occupational exposure to SARS-CoV-2 puts them at a high risk of serious complications of COVID-19. So actually, if you consider the timing of when these statements were released, they're actually incredibly consistent. Not to mention, the original statement you quoted was emphasizing Pfizer's full approval. It was not meant to provide detailed information on booster shots. Of course, if you're wondering why the FDA changed their minds, that happens all the time. Especially during a new pandemic, decisions and recommendations have to be changed whenever we obtain new data and as the situation in the country changes. But experts will always try to make the best recommendations at the time with the limited data we have, which is infinitely times better than the hunch people have who aren't even literate in infectious diseases.
Just very confusing stuff.
Your example is a terrible one, but that doesn't mean experts always agree. I'm ready to admit that sometimes scientific organizations don't always see eye to eye. As a better example, the FDA was battling with scientists at Pfizer regarding a third shot for the longest time, where Pfizer shows that it significantly increased immunity, while the FDA saw the effects of the first and second dose to last long enough that a third shot is not warranted. Many scientists also said that instead of administering third doses, it's better to donate these shots to other countries that need them. So you can kind of see how part of this is a little bit more opinionated and lean towards the size of ethics. Let me be clear. While scientific organizations do disagree amongst themselves, they generally agree on the vast majority of things. Like how they agree that masking is important, taking the vaccine at all is important, recommending people to travel less. Scientists are all in agreement here. So sure, let's make up a random number, say 1% of things some organizations may disagree on, but that doesn't mean the scientific community as a whole aren't in harmony with each other. And you're really only trying to emphasize on the recommendations here. But at the end of the day, recommendations released by the FDA and CDC will often have a few opinions mixed inside. However, what you don't see under the hood are things like data interpretation, the science behind the spread of COVID, variants, mechanisms of action, things like that. There are tons of papers published online over the last almost 2 years regarding things about COVID biology, such as, for example, how spike proteins changes to closed and open fist conformations during infection, and only one conformation can bind to ACE2 receptors. When it comes to the hard biology, there's no disagreements. You just don't hear about those unless you're a biologist that actively reads papers regarding this, or if you're like me who actually worked in the field and has to keep up with recent scientific publications. I hope I made my point clear.
But what's also interesting about the FDA approving the Pfizer vaccine is that now there are so many people who are saying, you see all of you people who were hesitant about the vaccine, well, now you can rest easy and just go get the Pfizer shot because the FDA approved it, which means that all the testing has been done, all the kinks have worked out, it's all good, you can trust it 100%. I've heard that so much since this news came out, but the thing is, that's not what FDA approval actually means. And even in the press release itself, the FDA does acknowledge that they're still doing more testing on the effects of the Pfizer vaccine.
The common person in the general public may not fully know what FDA approval actually means, but I highly doubt you do either, considering what you just said. Now, I actually worked in clinical trials before, and I have done some that were FDA trials, meaning they were subject to scrutiny, auditing, and criticism by the FDA. And let me tell you, the FDA checks absolutely everything from your documentation to your collected data. It's an incredibly rigorous process, and the first thing they absolutely consider is the risk of your investigation investigational product on the patients that receive it. But of course, that doesn't mean they dismiss your study for just any adverse events. FDA approval involves the display of evidence to a significant degree and sample size that your product maximizes its benefits compared to the risks it poses. Emphasis on the risk because that's the first thing to ever consider, followed by the benefits because the product must show a significant benefit as opposed to the risks. The Pfizer vaccine demonstrates precisely this, and honestly, I'm surprised they didn't give full FDA approval earlier. That being said, just because a product is FDA approved does not mean the study stops, because although we have demonstrated the drug to be safe and the adverse events either mild or rare, that doesn't mean there aren't little tiny bits of information in how the vaccine affects very specific types of people that we shouldn't be studying. Let's continue on this video since you will give an example here.
Specifically, it's written that, in addition, although not FDA requirements, the company has committed to additional post-marketing safety studies, including conducting a pregnancy registry study to evaluate pregnancy and infant outcomes after receipt of Comirnaty during pregnancy. Okay, I probably butchered that word, but I just think it's really strange that specific studies done on pregnant women for some reason are not necessary according to the FDA. Like, as a pregnant woman, I gotta say that seems pretty necessary to me.
Comirnaty is the brand name for Pfizer's vaccine. It's funny to me that some people probably think that Pfizer is the name of the actual vaccine. Anyway, you completely misinterpreted what that segment means when they said they're not going to continue studies on pregnancy and infant outcomes. It absolutely does not mean they haven't studied it yet, that they're doing it now. We already have tons of data for how the Pfizer vaccine affects pregnancy and birth, and we know this from the data that it is completely safe and the vaccine does not affect fertility like many people claim. It is now recommended by multiple science organizations that pregnant women should be getting the vaccine. Now, if the vaccine was not safe for pregnant women, which they are, but for the sake of argument, then the vaccine would only be fully FDA approved for a specific group of people. So for example, the Pfizer vaccine right now is only fully approved for individuals aged 16 and older. If this does not include pregnant people, then it would just list fully approved for individuals aged 16 and older, not including pregnant individuals. But yet, because the data shows that the vaccine is safe for pregnant women, they are included in the full FDA approval. So let me clarify what this segment actually is saying. Just because we know something is safe does not mean we are familiar with every single outcome in every single corner case, because like any drug, there are bound to be exceptions, and some people may experience harsher adverse events, although incredibly rare. FDA approval, in simple terms, means that the benefits greatly outweigh the risks, and that is precisely the case here for pregnant women. But let's say you tracked data for 10 million people, which is way more than enough for phase 3 clinical trials, by the way, but perhaps there is an unknown adverse event that has a 1 in 20 million chance of showing up. In that case, although it hardly affects the risks because the benefits still greatly outweigh the risks, that doesn't mean we shouldn't know about these incredibly rare adverse events. Now, that's not the only thing being considered for this study, but the point is that we want to continue collecting data for potentially unexpected circumstances. And this is not unique to the vaccine. We do this for pretty much every drug released into the market, including ones that are FDA approved. Now, if you're thinking, oh, they should be more rigorous and get every single possible adverse event before giving the drug approval, well, that's simply not practical. Because firstly, these extreme cases do not affect the overall benefits vs risks due to how rare they are, and second, the FDA is already one of the most rigorous organizations out there. And this is something that only people who actually worked in the field would fully understand, how incredibly detailed they are. When the FDA makes a recommendation or releases public information, it's easy to just see the one summary sentence and think, oh, they just gave us their opinion. But what is behind those decisions are thousands of hours of sweat and tears, collecting and analyzing and cross-checking data. I'm getting into a bit of a tangent, but the takeaway here is that the secondary post-approval pregnancy study is not something that needs to be of concern. There's plenty of data already out there that shows the vaccine is safe and effective for pregnant women.
And furthermore, it's also written that, in addition, the FDA is requiring the company to conduct post-marketing studies to further assess the risks of myocarditis and pericarditis following vaccination with Comirnaty. If you see anybody telling you that you can trust the vaccine because we know everything we need to know about it since it's been FDA approved, really just show them this. That is not at all what FDA approval means.
I don't know anyone that actually said that FDA approval means we know literally everything about the vaccine and that it is 100% safe. There's not a single drug or medication out there where we know that for 100%. But if we know 99.99% that it is safe and effective, then that's enough of a reason to go get the shot. This is not an issue on the FDA's authority and expertise. You should still be trusting the experts, and when they approve of a product by FDA standards, you should be trusting them. That is why sometimes people might say something like, trust the experts, because your video here precisely demonstrates why someone who is uneducated on the subject can spread false information. In this case, the methods of presentation by the FDA to the public, the interpretation of information, and the scientific method. In other words, your video here itself is evidence against your own point. Alright, that'll do it for this video. Maybe a part 2 later on down the road.